On the 5th of December 1872, some 400 nautical miles from the Azores, Mary Celeste would be discovered abandoned by the ship Dei Gratia. Celeste, an American brigantine, was found relatively seaworthy, though her lifeboat was missing, as were all 10 of the ship's crew and passengers. When the searchers of Dei Gratia boarded, they found the ship's cargo more or less intact, and all the personal possessions of the crew in place. There were plenty of provisions still untouched as well. It was as if all the souls aboard had simply vanished, as though they had never existed. The phenomena of ghost ships is known the world over, and quite possibly, Mary Celeste is the most infamous in history. The famous ship's beginnings started 12 years earlier, far from where she would be discovered. In late 1860, work began on building the ship in the shipyard of Joshua Dewis in the village of Spencer's Island in Nova Scotia, Canada. Built in the Carvel fashion and as a brigantine, she was registered as Amazon from Parsborough on the 10th of June 1861, having been launched a few weeks earlier on the 18th of May. Her maiden voyage would be marred with tragedy. Sailing to 5 islands to load timber destined for London, Captain Robert McClellan, one of her 9 owners, took ill. With his condition worsening, Amazon returned to Spencer's Island. McClellan died on the 19th of June. Despite losing her first captain within a matter of weeks, Amazon was taken out on this Atlantic crossing by a new captain, John Nuttin Parker. The ship would collide with fishing equipment on the way, and on the return would sink a brig in the English Channel following another collision. It seems that over the next few years, very little happened. Amazon primarily carried cargo as part of the West Indies trade, with the occasional transatlantic journey. Captain Parker would be succeeded by Captain William Thompson in 1863, and it would be Thompson who was in command when the end came. A storm would drive Amazon ashore in October 1867 in Nova Scotia. The damage was so bad, her owners declared her a wreck. Nearly a year after being wrecked, and changing owners a few times, Richard Haynes would purchase the ship in November 1868 for the price of $1,750 Spending a further $8,825 restoring the ship, Haynes made himself captain and registered her with the Port of New York under a new name, Mary Celeste. However, Haynes would lose the ship in 1869 after it was seized by creditors. Talk about can't pay, they'll take it away. James Winchester would become the new owner, and by 1872, Mary had undergone another refit and considerable structural changes at the cost of $10,000. This increased her length, width, and breadth. 103 feet, 25.7 feet, and 16.2 feet, respectively. A second deck was also added. All in all, these works increased the ship's tonnage to 282.28. Finally, after years of changing hands and some bad luck, this vessel was ready to sail again. The new captain was a man named Benjamin Spooner Briggs. His father had been a sea captain as well. From what I can tell, Briggs had risen to be a respected man in his profession, and was probably a very good choice for the posting, although being a minor shareholder in the ship's consortium probably helped. Refitted, ready, and full of cargo, Mary Celeste left her pier on the East River in New York on the 5th of November 1872. She was headed for Genoa and carried a cargo of 1,701 barrels of alcohol. After a few days of bad weather, Celeste finally left the harbour and entered the Atlantic. There were 10 aboard, Captain Briggs, his wife, and young daughter, Sarah and Sophia, as well as 7 crewmen. Curiously, not far away, in Hoboken, New Jersey, Dei Gratia awaited cargo for her voyage to Genoa by way of Gibraltar. Captained by David Morehouse, another respected man of the sea, who quite possibly knew Captain Briggs, Dei Gratia would depart on 15th of November, charting a similar course and 8 days after Mary had left New York. As it crossed the Atlantic, heavy weather dogged Celeste every step of the way. The brigantine would take 2 weeks to get close to the Azores. The final log was recorded on the morning of the 25th of November. It was a routine entry from 9 days before her discovery by Dei Gratia. The log recorded her position off the coast of Santa Maria Island in the Azores. This would be 400 nautical miles from where she would be found deserted. Between those 9 days and 400 miles, something happened that caused the entire crew to disappear. Having first been spotted by the helmsman of Dei Gratia, the derelict ship continued sailing unsteadily. The experienced Morehouse could tell something was wrong and ordered his ship to sail to the mystery ship's aid. With no response to his signals and not seeing any crew, Morehouse got his ship close enough to send 2 of his crew to board. It would be first mate Oliver Devell and second mate John Wright that would make the discovery that this ship was Mary Celeste and that she was abandoned in mysterious circumstances. As mentioned earlier, the ship was found seaworthy. There was mention of some wear and tear on account of it being sailed without crew to man her. I'm not expert enough, nor could I find anything conclusive on how long she had been without crew. So, with no obvious damage, what happened to the Mary Celeste? This brings us to the rather fun section of this video, and perhaps the reason why you clicked. The theories. And don't we have a wide range of theories to explore? To briefly name a few ideas put forth in the intervening 153 years: mutiny, murder, piracy, an explosion, and even sea monsters. Let's review the evidence and see what supports some or any of these theories. For mutiny, murder, and piracy to have occurred, you might expect to see evidence of violence: a blood-stained deck, damage to the wood from a sabre or pistol, perhaps even a body. None of this was found. There is an idea that the crew got drunk on the ship's cargo and mutinied, possibly killing Briggs and his family, but given the little signs of struggle, this is unlikely. Then you have to wonder what happened to the rest of the crew. Celeste's lifeboat was gone, so maybe they would be able to pretend to be shipwrecked sailors and hope their crime was never discovered. If that was the case, you'll then have to ask why the ship wasn't sunk by them to hide the evidence. Piracy can very easily be ruled out too. Far too little damage to the ship, and the cargo was found relatively intact, as were the crew's possessions. I don't know much about piracy, but robbing another ship of its cargo kind of seems to be the point. Should it have been pirates? Well, they would have to be the worst pirates we've ever heard of. Or not heard of, I guess. The plot of the 1936 film, The Mystery of the Mary Celeste, is wild. However, it pushes the notion of a murderer being on board the ship. One of 2 brothers, Volker and Boz Lorenzen, or maybe both, are often thought to have been possible culprits for the murder angle. This is simply because their personal belongings weren't among those left behind. I couldn't 100% verify that being the case, but it is also reported that they had lost their possessions in an earlier wreck that same year. Although completely fictional, the film puts forward the notion that Captain Morehouse had something to do with what occurred on the Celeste. There are 2 theories that I saw on this. One suggests that de Gratia came across Celeste and was able to kill all 10 people aboard and take command of the ship. However, this falls down too. Gratia was a far slower ship and had left America 8 days earlier, which makes it incredibly unlikely she would have caught the Mary Celeste before both had reached Gibraltar. The second theory is that Briggs and Morehouse were both in a conspiracy to share the salvage. As said earlier, it seems possible both captains knew each other. There is no evidence to suggest that they were close enough to come up with such a scheme though. Captain Briggs was a very religious man, and one theory suggests that he had killed all on board and himself in some form of religious mania. Again, this seems far from the truth. Now we've gotten through the more gruesome ideas on what might have happened, let's take a look at some others. One prevailing theory suggests that the alcohol vapours from the cargo expanded in the heat and caused a small explosion, thus spreading fear of a second explosion and causing those on board to abandon ship. More plausible than the above, though the evidence still doesn't support this one either. So, what could have happened? Captain Briggs was experienced and respected, as were his crew, so it seems improbable that they would abandon a more than seaworthy ship in such a haste as to leave behind their belongings without a definite cause. The ship's sounding rod was found on deck, which suggests it was being used. One of the ship's 2 pumps were later found to have malfunctioned. This discovery, most likely known by the crew at the time, and a possible false reading might have caused alarm that the ship was taking on water at a rapid rate. Only 3 feet of water was in the hold. Now that seems a lot to me, but from what I can tell, it's not an amount that should have caused panic. But maybe, with only 1 pump, a bad reading, or a rapid increase in water, I can see why the decision to abandon ship could have been made. From everything that I can see, this seems to be the most likely explanation. A combination of a broken pump and an error when measuring the depth of the water in the hold. How this occurred could have happened any number of ways. Maybe there was a higher than normal amount of water in the pumps, which also forced Captain Briggs to make a snap judgment. All we do know for certainty is that all 10 people aboard the ship, along with the lifeboat, have yet to be found. Having sighted land, Briggs may have ordered everyone into the lifeboat to either await rescue or to go to shore believing the Mary Celeste would sink. I saw both accounts that the line tethering the lifeboat to the ship was untied or uncut, one suggesting no rush, whilst the other would highlight a frantic panic to be off ship. Once on the lifeboat, it seems likely that it was blown off course or even swamped, condemning all aboard to a watery grave. The story of the Mary Celeste continued after this tragedy. Spreading his crew across both ships, Captain Morehouse arrived in Gibraltar on the 12th of December 1872 aboard Dei Gratia, with the Celeste arriving the following morning due to bad weather. Salvage hearings began a few days later, led by Sir James Cochrane, Chief Justice in Gibraltar, and Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General. Having heard testimony and reviewed some of the evidence, it seemed Flood had made up his mind that foul play was the cause of what had happened on board Mary Celeste. An inspection of the ship, carried out on the 23rd of December, brought to bear damage to the ship's bow, as well as what might have been traces of blood on deck and on Captain Briggs's sword. The damage to the bow was supposedly done by a sharp tool, deliberately, and was not caused by anything natural or by collision. All of this strengthened the notion of murder and mutiny in Flood's mind. By the end of January, he sent his reports back to London, stating that the crew had gotten drunk, murdered the Briggses and the officers before damaging the bow to pretend a collision had occurred, and fled. There was also suspicion levelled at Morehouse, his crew, and their story. It was only on the arrival of James Winchester that the idea of what had happened began to change. Winchester spoke of Briggs's character and insisted the captain would not have abandoned the ship unless absolutely necessary. Plus, further review of the damage to the bow was deemed to have been natural actions of the sea, and not made by a person. By the end of February, with not much else to go on, Mary Celeste was freed from the court's possession and allowed to carry on its journey to Genoa under a new captain and a local crew. The true end for this infamous ship came later. With stories of murder and bad luck preceding her arrival in New York in September, it is no surprise that she became an unpopular ship. Under new owners and plying the West Indian trade routes, the Celeste would struggle to be profitable. Towards the end of 1884, under the command of Captain Gilman Parker, he conspired to commit insurance fraud. Loading up with a cargo that was misrepresented as valuable, he was able to insure the ship far in excess of its actual value. On the 3rd day of January 1885, Mary Celeste approached Port-au-Prince of Haiti. Parker deliberately ran the ship aground on Rochaloy Bank, a well-known reef. This impact damaged the ship beyond repair. Rowing to shore, Parker and his crew were able to sell what cargo remained. However, this would be his downfall. After reporting the goods were, in fact, worthless, the insurance company led a thorough investigation which discovered the attempted fraud. The case was settled without criminal charges on the grounds that Parker would repay the $500 he had gotten for the sold goods and rescind his insurance claims. This would damage his professional reputation hugely. 3 months later, he would die a poor man. One of his defendants would kill himself, though I couldn't tell if this was in relation to the fraud, whilst another supposedly went mad. With 3 of her captains dead, found derelict and abandoned, with all hands missing, the centre of bad luck and failing businesses, the belief that the Mary Celeste was cursed spread. Perhaps it is a good thing this infamous ship remains sunk. A 2001 expedition led by Clive Cussler believed they had found what little remains of the ship on the Rochaloy Bank, but analysis of the woods suggested it came from a later ship. 153 years on from finding the ship adrift and unmanned, wild theories and stories have loomed in the public consciousness since. Murder and mutiny, an enduring curse that claimed the lives of 3 captains and many crew, a malfunction pump and faulty equipment. I doubt we will ever know the true cause of what happened to Mary Celeste, but she will keep her secrets forever, along with her ghosts.